thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 3, The Origin of Freemasonry, the 1717 theory exploded by Chalmers I, Paton. Now let us go a little farther back and inquire if the system of Masonry or Freemasonry existed in the 17th century. The evidence of its existence then, if it can be produced, must be fatal to the 1717 theory, and leads us a step farther towards proving its high antiquity. Evidence of this kind can be produced in abundance. Reference has already been made to the theory which has been proponnded, that modern or speculative Masonry was invented by Elias Ashmole and some of his literary associates in the latter part of the 17th century. But how does this theory accord with facts? Ashmole says in his diary, "I was made a Freemason at Warrington, Lancashire, with Colonel Henry Mainwaring of Kirthingham in Cheshire by Mr. Richard Penkett, the warden and the fellow crafts, on the 16th of October 1646. Here it may be observed in passing that we have an instance of the use of the term Freemason in the 17th century, although for reasons already assigned this may be deemed of little importance. It is of far more importance to inquire how such a man as Ashmole, an eminent natural philosopher, chemist and antiquary, and the founder of the noble museum at Oxford which bears his name, ever thought of being made a Mason. With operative Masonry he had nothing to do, and there must have been something in the Masonry of his time to induce him to take part in it. He continued to the end of his life a zealous member of the craft and is known to have projected a work on the history of Masonry. Not only does all this forbid the idea that Freemasonry was invented in 1717, but it forbids the idea that it was invented by Ashmole himself. Another passage may be quoted from Ashmole's diary as showing the state of things in the latter part of the 17th century. On March 10th, 1682, he says, "About 5 post-merid, I received a summons to appear at a lodge to be held next day at Mason Hall in London, March 11th, 1682. Accordingly I went, and about noon was admitted into the Fellowship of Freemasons. Sir William Wilson Knight, Captain Richard Borthwick, Mr. William Woodman, Mr. William Gray, Mr. Samuel Taylor, and Mr. William Wise. I was the senior fellow among them, it being 35 years since I was admitted. There were present, besides myself, the fellows, after named Mr. Thomas Wise, Master of the Masons' Company this present year, Mr. Thomas Shorthose, etc. We all dined at the Half Moon Tavern in Cheapside, at a noble dinner, prepared at the charge of the new accepted Masons." Here again we have the term Freemason used in the 17th century. But, as has already been said, this is of little consequence, except indeed that it shows how hastily the supposed mere recent use of this term has been accepted as an argument against the antiquity of Freemasonry, and how little those are to be trusted who use such arguments. The evidence, however, afforded by this passage is conclusive as to the existence of Masonic lodges in 1682, of which the members were not all mere operative Masons. Indeed, we may well suppose that no mere operative Mason was present at the lodge meeting which Ashmole mentions, but that all were gentlemen such as those whom he names. He evidently appears to have felt honored by his connection with the lodge, and to have delighted in the society into which he was brought at its meetings. The idea of a mere operative craft or a lodge of mere operative Masons is out of the question. Thus then, we have conclusive evidence that a system of Freemasonry existed many years before 1717, having those distinctive characters which belong to modern Freemasonry, and wholly different from a mere operative craft or guild. Another important document of the end of the 17th century is the often quoted letter of the celebrated John Locke to the Earl of Pembroke, concerning a manuscript, in the Bodleian Library. It has not been alleged that this letter is a fabrication, and supposing it, as we seem entitled to suppose it, to be genuine, it affords incontestable evidence of the existence of speculative, as distinguished from mere operative Masonry, at the date of its composition. It may be best to quote the letter itself. The 6th of May, 1696. "My Lord, I have at length, by the help of Mr. Collins, procured a copy of that manuscript in the Bodleian Library which you were so curious to see, and in obedience to your Lordship's commands I herewith send it to you. Most of the notes annexed to it are what I made yesterday for the reading of my Lady Masham, who has become so fond of Masonry as to say that she now more than ever wishes herself a man that she might be capable of admission into the fraternity. The manuscript, of which this is a copy, appears to be about 160 years old, yet, as your Lordship will observe by the title, It is itself a copy of one yet more ancient by about 100 years, for the original is said to have been in the handwriting of King Henry VI. When that prince had it is at present an uncertainty, but it seems to me to be an examination taken perhaps before the king of someone of the Brotherhood of Masons, among whom he entered himself, as it is said, when he came out of his minority, and thenceforth put a stop to the persecution that had been raised against them. But I must not detain your lordship longer by my preface from the thing itself. Can any evidence be more conclusive than that afforded by this letter of the existence of a fraternity of Masons in England, practicing speculative Masonry as well as operative in the end of the 17th century, regarded then as ancient and as having enjoyed the favor of the great in former days? There must have been something very peculiar about the character of that fraternity, as to which my Lady Masham wished that she were a man in order that she might be capable of admission into it. It must have been something very different from an ordinary guild. As to the manuscript in the Bodleian Library itself, it also affords important evidence of the existence and nature of Masonry long before the end of the 17th century. We may take it for granted that the manuscript was then, as Locke says, about 160 years old. We need not assume that the original from which it was copied was in the handwriting of King Henry VI, and yet probably it carries us back to about the time of his reign, the middle of the 15th century. It is not necessary for our present argument, however, to be particular about 100 years or so in the date. It is enough for us to consider the document as of a date long anterior to the beginning of the 18th century, probably at least 200 years and perhaps more than 250 years before that date. What then is the evidence which it affords? It proves beyond controversy that there existed in England a fraternity of Masons professing to be of very ancient origin. Their origin in England is referred to Peter Gower, a Grecian whose name Locke, in a note, suggests to be a corruption of Pythagoras. Peter Gower, it is said, when he journeyed to learn, was first made and anon taught. Even so should all others be right. Nevertheless, Masons have always in every time, from time to time, communicated to mankind such of their secrets as generally might be useful. They have kept back such alone as should be harmful if they came in evil hands, or such as might not be helpful without the teachings to be joined herewith in the lodge, or such as do bind the brothers most strongly together by the profit and commodity coming to the confraternity therefrom. Nothing can be plainer or more conclusive than the evidence which this affords of the existence of speculative Freemasonry, of the making and teaching of Masons, and of secrets peculiar to the craft. The concluding questions and answers for the whole document is in the form of question and answer, as in an examination taken before the king, are as follows. Are Masons better men than others? Some Masons are not so virtuous as some other men, but in the most part they be more good than they would be if they were not Masons. Do Masons love each other mightily, as is said? Yes, verily, and it may not otherwise be. For good men and true, knowing each other to be such, do always love the more, as they be more good. There is something in all this entirely different from what can be supposed concerning any ordinary operative guild. We have evidence here of Freemasonry, at least in its rudiments, however far it may have been from that comparative perfection to which it has now attained, and to which it may well be supposed that Ashmole, and after him Desaguliers and Anderson in their respective times, contributed. For it must be observed that Freemasonry is capable of indefinite improvement, and has continued to receive improvement even to the present day. Those who maintain its high antiquity are by no means bound to show that it was in every respect the same in former ages as it is now. All that they have to show is that it existed essentially the same, and that the Freemasons of the present day can trace their pedigree, if the figure may be allowed, to a remote antiquity. That they can go back beyond 1717, and even beyond the time of Ashmole in the middle of the 17th century, has now, it may be hoped, been sufficiently demonstrated. I know not what effect the sight of this old paper may have upon your lordship, says Locke, in a note appended to his copy of it which he sent to the Earl of Pembroke. But for my own part, I cannot deny that it has so much raised my curiosity as to induce me to enter myself into the fraternity, which I am determined to do if I may be admitted the next time I go to London, and that will be shortly. Whether or not the celebrated philosopher ever carried out this intention does not appear. We have further evidence, however, of the existence and state of Freemasonry in the 17th century. The following regulations were adopted in 1663, the Earl of St. Albans being Grand Master, Sir John Denham, Deputy Grand Master, and Sir Christopher Wren and Mr. George Webb, Grand Wardens. 1. That no person of what degree soever be accepted a Freemason except in a regular lodge, whereof one is to be a master or a warden in that division where such lodge is kept, and another to be a craftsman in masonry. 2. That no person hereafter be accepted but such as are able of body, of good parentage, of good reputation, and an observer of the laws of the land. 3. That no person who shall be accepted a Freemason shall be admitted into any lodge until he has brought a certificate of the time and place of his acceptation from the master of the limit where he was made, and the lodge kept. And the master shall enroll the same in parchment, and shall give an account of such acceptations at every general assembly. 4. That every person who is now a Freemason shall bring to the master a note of the time of his acceptation, to the end that it may be enrolled in such priority of place as the brother deserves, and that the whole company and fellows may better know each other. 5. That for the future the said fraternity of Freemasons shall be regulated and governed by one Grand Master, and as many wardens as the said society shall think fit to appoint at every general assembly. 6. That no person shall be accepted unless he be 21 years old or upwards. There can be no doubt but that we have in these regulations proof of a well-established system of Freemasonry in 1663. On the employment in them of the term Freemason, it seems, for reasons already stated, of no particular importance to insist. It may be asked, however, how the view which they present of the state of Freemasonry in England immediately after the restoration of Charles II accords with that already exhibited of its low state at the beginning of the 18th century. The answer is probably to be found in the troubles of the times, the political convulsions which took away the attention of men from those peaceful pursuits for which Masons are associated. If, however, there seems to be a difficulty in reconciling our view of the state of Freemasonry in England in 1663 with that which existed 40 or 50 years later, we find its truthfulness confirmed by the extracts from Ashmole's diary already quoted, as well as by the letter of the London lodges in 1717 to the other lodges of England, and by the whole course of proceedings connected with the formation of the Grand Lodge of England in that year. The resolution then adopted by the Masons to choose a Grand Master among themselves, till they should have the honor of a noble brother at their head, may of itself be held to imply the recollection of a time when that office was held by noble brethren. But how, it may be asked, can the Earl of St. Albans have been Grand Master in 1663 when there was no regularly constituted Grand Lodge in England? Or how can Sir John Denham have been Deputy Grand Master, and Sir Christopher Wren and Mr. George Webb Grand Wardens? The probable answer is that they were appointed by the King, or that the Grand Master was so appointed, and that he nominated the subordinate officers. For this seems to have been the practice in England as well as in Scotland till the end of the 17th century. It is stated in Masonic histories that the Earl of St. Albans was succeeded in the office of Grand Master by the Earl of Rivers, Sir Christopher Wren becoming Deputy Grand Master. If all this is not mere fable, the 1717 theory falls at once to the ground, and it becomes incumbent therefore on those who maintain that theory to prove that it is mere fable, and that these seemingly accurate historic statements have been fraudulently fabricated. Until proof of this is adduced, they must be accepted as true, and mere general declarations must be set aside as of no value whatever. The following is the passage of Plot's Natural History of Staffordshire relative to Freemasonry. It is thought good to quote it in full, although it contains some things which might perhaps without impropriety have been omitted. But any abridgment of it might possibly be thought to diminish its value as evidence. Having it before him at full length and copied word for word, every reader may judge of its import for himself. They have a custom in Staffordshire of admitting men into the society of Freemasons that in the moorlands of this county seems to be of greater request than anywhere else, though I find the custom spread more or less all over the nation. For here I found persons of the most eminent quality that did not disdain to be of this fellowship, nor indeed need they, were it of that antiquity and honor that is pretended in a large parchment volume they have amongst them, containing the history and rules of the craft of masonry, which is there deduced not only from sacred writ, but profane story, particularly that it was brought into England by St. Amphibolus, and first communicated to St. Alban, who set down the charges of masonry, and was made paymaster and governor of the king's works, and gave charges and manners as St. Amphibolus had taught him, which were after confirmed by King Athelstan, whose youngest son Edwin loved well masonry, took upon him the charges and learned the manners, and obtained for them of his father a free charter. Whereupon he caused them to assemble at York, and to bring all the old books of their craft, and out of them ordained such charges and manners as they then thought fit, which charges in the said scroll or parchment volume are in part declared, and thus was the craft of masonry grounded and confirmed in England. It is also there declared that these charges and manners were after perused and approved by King Henry VI and his council, both as to masters and fellows of this right worshipful craft, into which society, when they are admitted, they call a meeting, or lodge as they term it in some places, which must consist at least of 5 or 6 of the ancients of the order, whom the candidates present with gloves, and so likewise to their wives, and entertain with a collation according to the custom of the place. This ended, they proceed to the admission of them, which chiefly consists in the communication of certain secret signs, whereby they are known to one another all over the nation, by which means they have maintenance whithersoever they travel. For if any man appear, though altogether unknown, that can show any of these signs to a fellow of the society, whom they otherwise call an accepted mason, he is obliged presently to come to him, from what company or place soever he be in. Nay, from the top of a steeple, what hazard or inconvenience soever he run, to know his pleasures, and assist him, viz. If he want work, he is bound to find him some, or if he cannot do that, to give him money or otherwise support him till work can be had, which is one of their articles. And it is another, that they advise the masters they work for, according to the best of their skill, acquainting them with the goodness or badness of their materials. And if they be in any way out in the contrivance of the buildings, modestly to rectify them in it, that masonry be not dishonored, and many such like that are commonly known, but some others they have, to which they are sworn after their fashion, that none know but themselves, which I have reason to suspect are much worse than these, perhaps as bad as this history of the craft itself, which there is nothing I ever met more false or incoherent. For not to mention that St. Amphibolus, by judicious persons, is thought rather to be the cloak than master of St. Alban, or how unlikely it is that St. Alban himself, in such a barbarous age and in times of persecution, should be supervisor of any works. It is plain that King Athelstan was never married or ever had so much as any natural issue, unless we give way to the fabulous history of Guy, Earl of Warwick, whose eldest son, Renburn, is said indeed to have been married to Leonea, the supposed daughter of Athelstan, which will not serve the turn neither. Much less ever had he a lawful son, Edwin, of whom I find not the least umbrage in history. He had indeed a brother of that name, of whom he was so jealous, though very young, when he came to the crown, that he sent him to sea in a pinnace, without tackle or oar, only in company with a page, that his death might be imputed to the waves and not to him. Whence the young prince, not able to master his passions, cast himself headlong into the sea and there died, who now unlikely to learn their manners, to get them a charter, or to call them together at York, let the reader judge. Yet more improbable it is still that Henry VI and his council should ever peruse or approve their charges and manners, and so confirm these right worshipful masters and fellows, as they are called in the scroll. For in the 3rd year of his reign, when he could not be 4 years old, I find an act of Parliament abolishing this society, it being then ordained that no congregations and confederacies should be made by Masons in their general chapters and assemblies, whereby the good course and effect of the statutes of laborers were violated and broken in subversion of law, and that those who caused such chapters or congregations to be holden should be adjudged felons, and those Masons that came them should be punished by imprisonment and make fine and ransom at the king's will. So very much out was the compiler of this history of the craft of Masonry, and so little skill had he in our chronicles and laws. which statute, though repealed by a subsequent act in the 5th of Elizabeth, where servants and labourers are compelled to serve and their wages limited, and all masters made punished for giving more wages than is taxed by the justices and the servants if they take it, etc. Yet this act too being but little observed, it is still to be feared these chapters of Freemasons do as much mischief as before, which, if one may estimate by the penalty, was anciently so great that perhaps it might be useful to examine them now. Natural History of Staffordshire, pages 316 to 318. Plot's account of Freemasonry, as it existed in his day, is all the more worthy of being accepted as evidence bearing on the question now, specially under consideration and on the whole question of the antiquity of Freemasonry, that he was evidently under the influence of strong prejudice against the whole system. This seems extraordinary in one whose patron was Elias Ashmole, but the passage just quoted exhibits the fact too strongly for any possible of doubt. His antipathy was evidently very strong, and when he could allege nothing bad against Freemasonry, he took leave to say that he suspected it. He felt himself constrained to state some of the laws of Freemasonry, which no man can deny to be but excellent and honorable, but he had reason to suspect that some of its secrets were very bad. What reason he says not. It would be waste of time and of paper to debate on such a question against such an antagonist, nor is greater respect due to his arguments concerning the early history of Freemasonry in England. It is not necessary for us, insofar as our present purpose is concerned, to show into what errors he has fallen as to the relation of Henry VI to Freemasonry, or as to the history of Athelstan and Edwin and St. Alban. Much here may be legendary and fabulous, whilst there is a substratum of truth, but we need not inquire. Insofar as the 1717 theory is concerned, which alone is at present under discussion, it is enough for us to have proof from Plot's pages that Freemasonry existed in England in the reign of James II in the year 1686, when his book was published, and before it, having a system substantially the same with that of the present day. A more perfect demolition of the 1717 theory as Plot's could not be possibly desired. We find from Plot's account of the Freemasonry of his day, at least 30 years before Freemasonry, that lodges of Masons existed not only in Staffordshire but throughout England, that they were governed by laws such as those of our present Freemasonry, maintaining the same system of brotherly kindness, and the same system of secrecy in the tokens by which the members of the order could make themselves known to each other, that persons of the most eminent quality sought admission into the order, and that they claimed for their order a great antiquity. We find the same controversy then existed as to the antiquity of the order which is carried on at the present day. Only, of course, it had no reference to 1717, nor to Desaguliers and Anderson, who, if they were then born, had not yet appeared in any public capacity. It is very interesting to see an antagonist of Freemasonry in 1686 raising objections against the antiquity of the system, much like those urged in 1871, although in 1871 we are confidently told that it does not extend back to 1686 at all. We take Plot's evidence that it does. None more conclusive could be desired. A curious corroborative proof of the antiquity of Freemasonry, not only in Britain but on the continent of Europe, is to be found in Plot's statement regarding the gloves presented by the candidates to the ancients of the order, who constitute the lodge that admits them. This practice has been long discontinued in Britain, and although a law is still in force for the clothing by the brethren of the lodge, it is observed in a different manner. But the presentation of gloves is still the practice in some parts of Europe. From this we may infer that it is an ancient practice, derived from a time when there existed a close connection between the Freemasonry of England and of the continent. It would not be easy to account for this minute point of agreement between the practice of England in 1686 and of some parts of the continent at the present day, without supposing an ancient connection and a common origin. What the scroll or parchment was of which Plot speaks, it would not be easy, and it is not necessary to determine. Some have supposed that it is the same manuscript to which Locke's letter refers, and which in his time existed in the Bodleian Library at Oxford. This opinion is not supported by sufficient evidence, but the reference made to Henry VI and his connection with Freemasonry give it considerable probability. If not the same, it must have been of somewhat similar purport. The Harleian manuscript, number 2054, in the British Museum belongs to the early part of the 17th century. It is in the handwriting of Randall Holmes. It was found at Chester. It contains the names of the brethren received into the Masonic fraternity, with what sum of money each was required to pay, or as the phrase in the manuscript is, to give for to be a Freemason. Here again we find the use of the term Freemason at a more early date than it is convenient for some who have recently founded their arguments upon it to assign to it. This manuscript affords also some evidence of the existence of a system of Freemasonry at the time when it was written, similar to that of the present day. It informs us that there are several words and signs of a Freemason to be revealed, which may be communicated to no one except to the master and fellows of the said Society of Freemasons. Brethren initiated will at once understand this. There were never any such words or signs among the tailors, or the shoemakers, or any of the other crafts. Many of the lodges throughout England have records long previous to 1717, which, whilst they prove the antiquity of the lodge, show also its continuity, and that, in the estimation of all the members, they continued after the foundation of the Grand Lodge of England and their connection with it to be the same lodges as before, and to carry out the same system as before. The master's chair of one of the English lodges was probably made in the early part of the 17th century, if it is not even older, and it bears symbols similar to those now used in Masonic lodges. These are important facts as bearing on the question now at issue. Reference has already been made to the large number of noblemen and other persons of eminence who joined the Masonic fraternity in England very soon after the revival of Freemasonry and the foundation of the Grand Lodge in 1717. It may be proper, however, to direct a little further attention to this point. It has been mentioned that the Masons, having resolved to choose one of their own existing number for Grand Master, till they should have the honor of a noble brother at their head, their choice fell upon Brother Anthony Sayer. He was succeeded by George Payne, Esq., and he by Dr. John Theophilus Desaguliers, the office being held by each only for 1 year. Desaguliers was succeeded by Mr. Payne, who was re-elected Grand Master and contributed more than perhaps any other to the advancement of the interests of the fraternity. But in 1721, the Duke of Montagu was elected Grand Master, and from that time to the present, the office has always been filled by persons of high rank, sometimes by members of the royal family, and even by the King himself. The Duke of Montagu was succeeded in 1722 by the Duke of Wharton, and he in 1723 by the Earl of Dalkeith, afterwards Duke of Buccleuch. But it is unnecessary to proceed in this enumeration of names. These are only mentioned as showing to how high a position Freemasonry in England attained within 2 or 3 years after 1717, and how unreasonable, therefore, the supposition is that it was then newly invented, and that its pretensions of antiquity were wholly unfounded, or that it was a thing which had never been heard of before. The only theory which consists with the facts is that it had a prior existence, and that its pretensions to high antiquity were not new, nor then brought forward for the first time. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.